Adam Miller began his lifelong pursuit of collecting old songs while still in grade school. Armed with an audiographic memory and an uncommonly good ear for melody, his childhood ambition was to learn every song he heard. An accomplished folklorist, historian, and a song collector, he has now amassed a remarkable repertoire of over 5,000 songs. One of the premier autoharpists in the world, Adam Miller is a renowned American folk singer and natural-born storyteller. With no further ado, please help me welcome Mr. Adam Miller.
Ireland has its own classical music, and their great composer is a contemporary of Vivaldi's who lived some 350 years ago by the name of Turlough O'Carolan. He was born in the year 1670. A long tradition of blind itinerant Irish harpers. If you had a blind kid, you'd apprentice him to a blind harper because he'd have a much better life. He'd be able to travel around on horseback, led by an assistant, to all the richest people in Ireland, and every single one of them was English. The English landowners in Ireland dominating their serfs. And he'd stay at their homes and drink their wine and flirt with their daughters and eat fabulous meals and never leave a farthing. He would compose a poem for the head of the house, and he would call it a planxty, the old Gaelic word for thank you. So all of his tunes are planxty this guy and planxty that guy and planxty the other guy. So O'Carolan is one of the last in this line because 100 years after this song was composed, there were only like 8 itinerant Irish harpers left. So the story is, now remember, he didn't play an auto harp. This wasn't invented until the 1880s. He played the Celtic harp, the table harp that you see that's so popular in this century in America. And apparently someone played a tune for him when he was about 30 years old, and he said, "You think that's a good tune? I can make up a better tune." And he made up the tune I just played you, Shebeg Shemor, which means big hill, little hill, and has to do with the little people, the leprechauns. But of course, that is another story. What's important is that song is so widespread today. I go to all these festivals and contra dances, and you can't get through 90 minutes without hearing Shebeg Shemor, written in 1700, still widespread in 2018. So, to kind of cut to the chase, every group of people have the people that they look down on. And for the English, it's been the Irish for a really long time. And the folk songs evidence this. About 500 years ago in Ireland, somebody in a pub made up a song about the stupidest Irishman around, a guy named Tom O'Lynn, and all the stupid things he did. And as you will find in many of these Irish songs, as soon as the Irish people got their hands on this song, Tom O'Lynn turned into a guy who was really resourceful and very clever and quite ingenious. And the song survives today as Brian O'Lynn. A little different than Tom O'Lynn. The oldest versions of this on paper go back to 1569, which are mighty, mighty early in this kind of music. So here's a version that I learned from my mentor, Sam Hinton, who grew up in East Texas during the Depression. This is the version of Brian O'Lynn they were playing down in Texas 80 years ago. About this resourceful and ingenious Irishman. Brian O'Lynn had no breeches to wear. He got an old sheepskin to make him a pair, with the flesh side out and the furry side in. They'll be charming and cool, says Brian O'Lynn. Brian O'Lynn had no shirt to put on, so he got an old sack and he made him a one. He puckered the mouth of it under his chin. Yeah, they'll think I've got ruffles, says Brian O'Lynn. Brian O'Lynn had no hat to put on, so he went to the dump heap and found him one. It had none of the crown left and less of the brim, but there's fine ventilation, says Brian O'Lynn. He did not have a coat, so he borrowed the skin of a neighboring goat. The two horns stuck out from the sides, but then, sure, they'll think I've got pistols, says Brian O'Lynn. Brian O'Lynn had no watch to put on, so he scooped up a turnip and made him one. He slipped a young cricket then under the skin. Sure, they'll think it's a tickin', says Brian O'Lynn. Brian O'Lynn to his house had no door. He'd the sky for the roof and the bog for a floor. He'd a way to jump out and a way to swim in. 'Tis a fine habitation, says Brian O'Lynn. Wife's mother, they all went over the bridge together. The bridge it broke down and they all tumbled in. We'll walk home on the bottom, says Brian O'Lynn. Brian O'Lynn and his wife and wife's mother, they all fell into the fire together. And Brian beneath, he got a burnt skin. Take a turn about mother, says Brian O'Lynn. Brian O'Lynn and his wife and wife's mother, they all slept in one bed together. The night it was cold and the blanket was thin. Well, I'll sleep in the middle, says Brian O'Lynn. There are a few books in the library that are really worth checking out, especially if your ancestors come from Ireland. There's a book that Conrad Arnensberg wrote in 1936 called The Irish Countryman, discussing the Irish customs. And it's worth reading because you'll look around your house and your life and your marriage and see how they actually apply hundreds of years later, if you find in the library, The Irish Countryman. Now, I want to talk about a guy by the name of Francis O'Neill. He was born in 1848 in County Cork, and he came over with so many people who came over from Ireland in the late 1840s and early 1850s. The potato famine is worth revisiting. The potato famine, the blight that just turned all the potatoes into a gelatinous goop, even the potatoes that you had harvested and stored, even the potatoes under the ground, every potato turned to mush. It was a natural disaster, but the famine was man-made. And this is well documented in the library. The famine is man-made because all the landowners in Ireland are English, and all their farmers are tenant farmers Irish. So they were growing, hundreds of tons of wheat every year in Ireland and shipping it overseas and making lots of money on it. And the poor Irish farmer had to grow a few potatoes in the shade and the rocks, and that worked great. The potato is one of the things that Columbus brought back. Try to imagine, there was no potato till Columbus brought it back, and the potato had 10 times the amount of calories that the other grains had. So it practically saved Ireland that, if you're going to only eat one food, potato will get you through. A little bit of milk and potato will have vitamin C, everything you need, lots of calories, a certain amount of protein. So that was their diet. And once the potato blight happened, people were starving. So you need to think of these Irish, when the potato blight happened, like the Somali refugees you see today, living out of doors without any money or any clothes or any way to cook or any way to eat. And the English just kept shipping that grain off and selling it. So it's a man-made disaster. And 2 million of those Irish starved to death, and another 2 million came over on 2,000 rickety boats over to the United States. And Captain O'Neill came over in that wave. Some of them had an advantage because some of them spoke English, and of course their skin was white. And Captain O'Neill, he became the chief of police in Chicago. And many chiefs of police in Chicago were corrupt, but Captain O'Neill was corrupt in a very different way. He loved Irish music. So every cop he hired could play the penny whistle and write music. And Captain O'Neill is known as the man who saved Irish music. You go online or go into the library and look at his books. The first one that he published in 1903 had 1,850 dance tunes. He saved every one of them. He published several other books and saved more than 5,000 tunes in his life. And most of the instrumentals that you'll hear in this program were first published in O'Neill's books. So he's very important in the history of Irish music. He retired in 1905, and many of the cops who worked for him were also named O'Neill. So it gets very confusing when you read about him. They were not related, it was just a common name. But one thing all of his cops had in common, they carried a penny whistle and they could read and write music. It was very important collecting these songs. So I'll play you one that survives today. Now, I play this big bluegrass festival in Kansas in September. They get 15,000 people. And when I get all my instruments packed up, I like to put on my mud boots and go walk around through the campground for a few hours and just listen to what people are playing in 2018. And I'm here to tell you that this is one of the 5 most frequently heard jam tunes if you walk around the fairgrounds at Winfield after midnight. This one is called The Red-Haired Boy, which O'Neill first published in 1898. It was called Gilderoy before that. When the Clancy Brothers and Tommy Makem recorded it, it was The Little Beggar Man. But this tune is very ancient and very widespread, and we'll see if it's familiar to your ear to give you a sense of the kind of melodies Captain O'Neill was rescuing. The Red-Haired Boy, an ancient Irish melody. American literature and American folk songs are full of tall tales. Tall tales come out of hard times. If you spent your summer cultivating a crop of grain and just before the harvest you went to get it and you got a foot of snow, there wouldn't be anything funny about it. You'd sit at the bank filling out a loan application, not very happy about that. Had to explain to the kids why you didn't have enough money for presents at the holiday time. But you know, when those kids are in high school, it's a heck of a better story if you tell them it was 10 feet of snow. And when you get to be a grandmother, you tell them it was 1,000 feet of snow, and it all fell on the same night. That's a tall tale. Now, friends, for many years I came to North Carolina in the summer, in August, to do the summer reading program for the small children at the public libraries. And if it was a beautiful day like today, the librarian would say, oh, let's get these kids out of the meeting room, take them out there by the lake, and play for them as the sun is setting, play some American folk music for them. So, always following instructions, I move my gear, I retune my instruments, I roll up my sleeves. And just as the concert is starting, the sun is setting over the lake, the librarian invariably comes over and they whisper in my ear, you did bring mosquito repellent, did you not? We have fairly good-sized mosquitoes in North Carolina. Well, I don't want to make myself instantly unpopular with everybody in the room just as the concert is starting, but I am unimpressed with your North Carolina mosquitoes. I live in Oregon on the Umpqua River, the third biggest river in the state, and friends, where I come from, we have mosquitoes the size of tangerines. We call them Umpqua River colossi. 2 of them can hold down a dog, and 4 of them can hold down a person. You come out there one summer, I want you to look for one mosquito. It's got the handprint of a man right between its eyes where my daddy hit it when I was a little boy. Do you have neighbors here in this part of the world to keep chickens in a chicken coop? You know that 2-inch chicken wire mesh they use to confine the chickens? Well, I'm here to tell you my neighbors take that stuff and they actually staple gun it up over the windows to keep the mosquitoes out. And it's fairly effective for keeping the big ones out. But the big ones fly around, they unlock the door, they let the little ones in, the little ones come in, you know, they bite you all over. You have no idea where the welts came from when you wake up in the morning. Now, there is a story from the days of the gold rush that a prospector came all the way from Missouri to the Umpqua River looking for gold, tied his mule to a mesquite tree, hiked down to that river to fill his canteen with water, returning 10 short minutes later to find that those giant mosquitoes, those Umpqua River colossi, had reduced his mule to a pile of bones. And they were playing horseshoes to see who was going to have that saddle for dessert. This is merely a way of introducing tall tales. See, there's a certain amount of exaggeration, but not too much or else nobody falls for it. Surely somebody in your family caught a fish this big, and every time they told the story, it got bigger and bigger, till even the littlest kids in the room would shake their heads in disbelief. Well, friends, a lot of these old songs are tall tales, and the oldest English language folk songs are collected in books in the library called child ballads. Not because they're for kids. Professor Child was the folklore professor at Harvard in the late 1800s. He traveled through Great Britain and wrote down all the old English language ballads, 50, 60, 70 verses long, all their different melodies, gave each one a number. Then he traveled through these eastern Appalachian mountains in the United States and found all these illiterate hillbillies who knew every single song, every single verse, and every single tune. He underestimated the oral tradition. You don't have to do a whole lot of reading and writing to remember the songs your parents sang and repeated over and over and over when you were little. Many of us remember those till we're parents ourselves and pass them on to our kids, and that's how this whole oral tradition thing goes. So let's try a child ballad. This one does come from Ireland, and this is the oldest feminist ballad in the English language canon. It's been on a piece of paper in this country since 1845, and they've sung it in Great Britain for hundreds of years. We really have no idea how old it is, but we do know that today there are 100 different ways to sing the song and 70 different melodies. So you can appreciate there's a few centuries of passing this on in an oral tradition to get so many different versions. This is the one that down south they call the farmer's cursed wife, C-U-R-S-T. Professor Child called it the devil and the farmer's wife. It is most certainly an American folk song today, and tonight, ladies and gentlemen, you are the folks. So I'll teach it to you and we'll all sing it together. The one about the devil and the farmer's wife. There was an old man lived over the hill, and if he ain't dead, he's living there still. Fi-di, diddle-I, fi, diddle-I, diddle-I day. Now what does that mean, fi-di, diddle-I, fi, diddle-I, diddle-I day? Nothing but a nonsense chorus some mother from Ireland or Scotland sang long ago. But she made the mistake of singing it in front of the children, and you know, whatever you say in front of the kids, they're going to remember every single word, and someday make a chorus just to humiliate you. So we'll sing it together. It goes like this. It goes, fi-di, diddle-I, 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 diddle. Let me hear you sing it. Fi-di, diddle-I, 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 day. Oh, that's just lovely. Now the devil went down to the farmer one day. He said, one in your family I'm taking away. Fi-di, diddle-I, 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 day. He said, please don't take my oldest son. There's work on the farm that's got to be done. Fi-di, diddle-I, 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 day. He said, it's not your oldest son I crave, it's your old scolding wife I'm taking away. Fi-di, diddle-I, 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 day. Well, the farmer gave a snort and he gave a little start. He said, take her, Lucifer, with all my heart. Fi-di, diddle-I, 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 day. So he put her in a sack and he towed her on his back, and down the road he went, clickety-clack. Fi-di, diddle-I, 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 day. He dumped her out at the gates of hell. He said, turn up the flames, boys, scorch her well. Fi-di, diddle-I, 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 day. There's 10 little devils up against a wall. There's 10 little devils with their balls and chains. She up with her foot and kicked out all their brains. Fi-di, diddle-I, 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 day. There's 10 little devils up against a wall saying, take her back, Daddy, she'll murder us all. Fi-di, diddle-I, 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 day. So he put her in a sack and he towed her on his back, and down the road he went, clickety-clack. Fi-di, diddle-I, 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 day. Now the old man was looking out of a crack. Oh my, he said, they're bringing her back. Fi-di, diddle-I, 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 day. He dumped her out at the farmer's feet and he said, here's your wife back, safe and sweet. Fi-di, diddle-I, 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 day. He said, here's your wife back, safe and well. If I'd have kept her any longer, she'd have torn up hell. Fi-di, diddle-I, 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 day. So this shows you what the power of a woman can do. She can beat up the devil and her husband too. Fi-di, diddle-I, 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 day. And this proves that the women are better than the men. She can go down there and come back up again. Fi-di, diddle-I, 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 day. Oh, fi-di, diddle-I, 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 day. So there's some quality in the Irish experience that one must maintain a sense of humor through even the hardest times. One of the old traditional Irish songs is first printed, curiously, in Mark Twain's book from 1883, Life on the Mississippi. And if you want to know about those days of the steamboat in the eastern United States, that's the great one to read. I got to check it out about every 5 years and just kind of refresh the stories in my mind. So you'll find this one in that book. I'll sing you the Irish version. I'll then sing you its American counterpart. This is a love story, and it's called Eggs and Marrow Bones. Oh, there was an old woman of Wexford, in Wexford she did dwell. She loved her old man dearly, but another man twice as well, with me rightful diddle-diddle and me rightful Laura-lee. Oh, one day she went for the doctor, some medicine for to find, saying, doctor, give me something that will make me old man blind, with me rightful diddle-diddle and me rightful Laura-lee. Oh, feed him eggs and marrow bones and make him sup them all. It won't be so very long after that he won't see you at all, with me rightful diddle-diddle and me rightful Laura-lee. So she fed him eggs and marrow bones and made him sup them all. It wasn't so very long after that he couldn't see the wall, with me rightful diddle-diddle and me rightful Laura-lee. Well, said he, I'll go and drown myself, but that would be a sin. Said she, I'll go to the waterside and help to push you in, with me rightful diddle-diddle and me rightful Laura-lee. Oh, the old woman, she stepped back a bit to run and push him in. The old man quickly jumped aside and she went tumbling in, with me rightful diddle-diddle and me rightful Laura-lee. Oh, loudly did she yell, and so loudly did she bawl, I can't help you, old woman, for I can't see you at all, with me rightful diddle deliddle and me rightful Laurel Lee. So here's one I learned from Sam Hinton that he used to sing in East Texas as a kid. In East Texas, I found this one on a piece of paper going back to 1842, and it's clearly the same story, just moved through the oral tradition into a different language, into a different nation. Same joke, same circumstances, same characters, different country, different song. It's called Johnny Sands. Was a man called Johnny Sands who married Betty Haig, and though she brought him golden land, she proved a terrible plague. For oh, she was a scolding wife, full of caprice and whim. She made poor Johnny tired of life, and she grew tired of him, and she grew tired of him. Said he, I'll go to the riverside and drown myself below. Said she, please do, you silly elf, I wished it long ago. And there upon the brink I'll stand while you run down the hill, to push me in with all your might. Said she, my love, I will. Said she, my love, I will. For fear that I should courage lack and try to save my life, please tie my hands behind my back, I will, replied his wife. She tied his hands behind his back, and when securely done, she placed him there upon the brink while she prepared to run, while she prepared to run. So down the hill his loving wife, she ran with all her force. To push him in, he stepped aside, and she fell in, of course. Oh, splashing, dashing like a fish, oh, save me, Johnny Sands. I can't, my dear, though much I wish, for you have tied my hands, for you have tied my hands. The best tunes get parodied the most. They recycle the melody, and this is probably the most parodied of the Irish tunes. As I play it, just close your eyes and think back to the Bugs Bunny cartoons you watched when you were young. The Irish washerwoman has been on a piece of paper since 1651. Pretty ancient Irish music, and if you only know one Irish jig, I'll bet this is the one that you know. Washerwoman. There are many sets of words. There are many sets of words that go with that tune, but my favorite goes like this. It goes, oh, McTavish is dead, and his brother don't know it. His brother is dead, and McTavish don't know it. They're both of them dead, and they're in the same bed, and neither one knows that the other one's dead. The greatest anti-war song ever written comes from Ireland. And it comes from Ireland right about the time of the American Civil War. And it's called Johnny, I Hardly Knew You. While going the road to Sweet Athy, hurroo, hurroo. While going the road to Sweet Athy, hurroo, hurroo. While going the road to Sweet Athy, a stick in me hand and a drop in me eye. Oh, a doleful damsel I heard cry, Johnny, I hardly knew ya. With our drums and guns and guns and drums, hurroo, hurroo. Our guns and drums and drums and guns, hurroo, hurroo. With our guns and drums and drums and guns, the enemy nearly slew ya. Oh, darling dear, you look so queer, Johnny, I hardly knew ya. Where are the legs with which you run? Hurroo, hurroo. Where are the legs with which you run? Hurroo, hurroo. Where are the legs with which you run when first you learned to carry a gun? Oh, indeed, your dancing days are done, Johnny, I hardly knew ya. With our guns and drums and drums and guns, hurroo, hurroo. With our guns and drums and drums and guns, hurroo, hurroo. With our guns and drums and drums and guns, the enemy nearly slew ya. Oh, darling dear, you look so queer, Johnny, I hardly knew ya. You haven't an eye, you haven't a leg, hurroo, hurroo. You haven't an eye, you haven't a leg, hurroo, hurroo. You haven't an eye and you haven't a leg. You're an eyeless, boneless, chickenless egg. And you'll have to be put with a bowl to beg, Johnny, I hardly knew ya. With our guns and drums and drums and guns, hurroo, hurroo. With our guns and drums and drums and guns, hurroo, hurroo. With our guns and drums and drums and guns, the enemy nearly slew ya. Oh, darling dear, you look so queer, Johnny, I hardly knew ya. Now, in the United States, the Guy Lombardo of his day, Gilmore, who led the great band during the Civil War, he turned that one into the one that we all sang when we were kids in the United States. When Johnny comes marching home again, hurrah, hurrah. But you have to admit that the Irish version is considerably more memorable. And I have to do these programs for libraries about protest songs and anti-war songs, and that's pretty much the climax right there. No, none of the great songwriters have ever surpassed Johnny, I Hardly Knew You. So there are a bunch of other ones that were widespread Irish songs that became very recognizable American folk songs. And I'll give you one here. This one, we don't know much about it except that it's older than the year 1900. Sometime in the 19th century, this one finally got written down. And it's sort of a common experience. It's the one about the old man who's rocking the cradle of a baby that's none of his own. On a fine summer's evening, I chanced for to wander down by the green woodside. I traveled alone. I heard an old man making sad lamentations and nursing a baby that was none of his own. E-I-O, my laddie, lie easy. It's your misfortune and none of me own, for they leave me here weeping and rocking the cradle and nursing a baby what's none of me own. I married this fair one who used to be airy. She cares for the neighbors and none of her own. She goes out in the evening to dancing and parties and leaves me here rocking the cradle alone. E-I-O, my laddie, lie easy. It's my misfortune and none of your own, for they leave me here weeping and rocking the cradle and nursing a baby what's none of me own. So come all you young fellows who want to get married, take my advice, leave the women alone, for it's by the Lord Harry, if you ever marry, she'll leave you there rocking the cradle alone. E-I-O, my laddie, lie easy. It's my misfortune and none of your own, for they leave me here weeping and rocking the cradle and nursing a baby what's none of me own. Well, by 1893, it was already a cowboy song. John Lomax collected it in the first great book of cowboy songs, published in 1910, 108 years ago, Cowboy Songs and Other Frontier Ballads. If your library has it, it's still one of the great books of cowboy folk songs. And this one's pretty widespread. Maybe you've heard it before. As I was out riding one morning for pleasure, I spied an old cowboy, he was riding along. His hat was thrown back and his spurs was a-jingling, and as he approached me, he was a-singing this song. Whoopie-tie-I-O, get along, little dogies, it's your misfortune and none of me home. Whoopie-tie-I-O, get along, little dogies, you know that Wyoming will be your new home. So there's no question those two are related. We just don't know when and where the transfer happened. And I always find it interesting to find, it used to be something that I would notice as a kid. You know, your ear would tell you that these two songs are related, and you spend a lot of time in the library to finally figure out how they are related. So here's one off the new CD. My new CD is called The Radio's Taking Our Songs Away, the Irrepressible American Folk Song in the Age of the Selfie. I had to record this song because I couldn't find anybody else who'd recorded it in the last 60 years, and the guy who recorded it in 1957, it's been out of print for 60 years, and it's a lovely little song. P.W. Joyce published the first English translation in 1909, saying this was a children's street song from Ireland, and there's an earlier book in Gaelic, printed in 1855, where the author collects it and says, when I was a kid, meaning 200 years ago, everybody sang this song. This is a completely widespread street song, and it's called I Wish I Had the Shepherd's Lamb. I wish I had the shepherd's lamb, the shepherd's lamb, the shepherd's lamb. I wish I had the shepherd's lamb, and Katie coming after is so goorum goorum hoo, is grama creed on Kelly Coo, is so goorum goorum hoo, Stupatha beg to water. I wish I had the yellow cow, the yellow cow, the yellow cow. I wish I had the yellow cow and Katie for my darling. It's so goorum goorum hoo, is grama creed on Kelly Goo. It's so goorum goorum hoo, Stupatha beg to water. I wish I had a herd of kine, a herd of kine, a herd of kine. I wish I had a herd of kine, and welcome from my darling. It's so goorum goorum hoo, is grama creed on Kelly Goo, is so goorum goorum hoo, Stupatha beg to water. So this tradition I talked about of O'Carolan's time, the blind itinerant Irish harpers who had this really good life. You know, their servants would lead them around on horses, and they'd stay with these very rich people for weeks and never leave anything but a song as a thank you. When they had the Irish Harpers Convention in 1792, only 8 people showed up. And this was great cause for alarm, because this was a tradition that had gone on as long as anybody could remember, and suddenly there was nobody there. Well, we're very fortunate that Edward Bunting was there. He was born in 1773. And kind of like me, and kind of like Captain O'Neill, he had a penchant for song collecting. So when I started doing this work, his books were very rare, and you'd have to go to a university library and leave your driver's license and look at them. Now they're free PDFs on the internet, so when you go home, you can download any one of the 3 books Bunting published. I believe it's 1796, 1809, and 1814, 3 books of ancient Irish music. And in the 1809 edition, he collected this song. So I'm reminding you that over 200 years ago, this was ancient Irish music. I learned it from somebody in New York who called it the modest and pleasant Eileen O'Farrell. You know, everybody's got a different name for it. I think it was in Gaelic, it was the Fair Ellie. But anyway, she must have been quite a gal, because it's a lovely tune. I put this one on my solo auto harp CD with the other Irish instrumentals I played at this concert. It's called Bare Fingers, and it's available on the table there if you like Irish music played on the auto harp. In 1986, Wexton published a book called The Famine Ships, if you want to read about that potato famine. It's kind of an interesting story because the potato came from the New World and they brought it to Ireland, but they really didn't know a whole lot about fertilizer in Great Britain, neither the English landowners or the Irish farmers. So sometime in the early 1800s, I think, they started bringing over bat guano from one island off the coast of South America where it had been deposited for like 1 million years and was probably the worst job in the world at that time, being one of the miners mining the bat guano. A lot of pulmonary cryptococcuses and other diseases would happen in your lungs. So they brought that over to fertilize that potato crop, and that's where the blight came from. That's how it got transported to Europe. And the thing that we forget about the potato blight is that it didn't just hit the Irish. There were just as many Germans who came over, except that they weren't poor and destitute and naked and starving and broke. They had suitcases and children and clothes and a little bit of money. You know, those Irish people, by the time the potato famine hit, they were living like the Somali refugees you see on television today. And I do a program about the orphan train movement. And if you had not had the potato famine, there would have been no orphan train movement in America, because it was those dirty Irish orphans that they wanted to get off the streets of New York and Boston and ship them out west. So just the same way they kind of, when they have the Olympics somewhere in America, they get all the homeless people and clean them up, you know, so tourists don't have to see them. It's kind of the way they do things. So there's one song that survives. It's often known as the famine song. The melody's been traced back to 1844, and the set of words I'm going to sing go back to 1895. We don't know for a fact that this is a song that people sang on those ships coming from Ireland to America, but what the folk songs do is, you see, the history tells us what happened and where and to whom and how, but the folk songs tell us how the people felt. and that's why they're so important. So I'll sing this one for you, the famine song, and then we'll see how it survives in American country music. Of course, the Gaelic word for potatoes is praties. Oh, the praties, they go small, over here, over here. Oh, the praties, they grow small, and we dig them in the fall, and we eat them, coats and all, full of fear, full of fear. Oh, I wish that we were geese, night and morn, night and morn. Oh, I wish that we were geese, for they fly to where they please, and they live their life in ease, eating corn, eating corn. Oh, we're down into the dust, over here, over here. Oh, we're down into the dust, but the Lord in whom we trust, will you give us crumb for crust, full of fear, full of fear. So there's a whole series of songs that are kind of like dumb blonde jokes. They make fun of a given area, so people who are not from that area can make fun of the people who live in that area. And this one, the way I learned it, is it makes fun of the people around Nashville. And you'll hear what we call floating stanzas. You'll hear some of the ideas in that song floating up into this song. And I have no idea how old it is. I learned it from my mentor, Art Thiem, who's been dead for couple of years. He was born back in 1941. I have no idea where he got it, but I've always noticed that these two, this song and the famine song, were clearly related. Round Nashville. Oh, potatoes, they grow small round Nashville. Oh, potatoes, they grow small round Nashville. Oh, potatoes, they grow small, and we dig 'em in the fall, and we eat 'em coats and all round Nashville. Oh, the roosters, they lay eggs round Nashville. Oh, the roosters, they lay eggs round Nashville. Oh, the roosters, they lay eggs, they're as big as old beer kegs. They got whiskers on their legs round Nashville. If you want to get a drink round Nashville, if you want to get a drink round Nashville, if you want to get a drink, give the Democrats a wink, and you'll get it for you think round Nashville. So I don't know how those verses get into that song, but that's folk music for you, the recycling of melodies, the floating stanzas, the recycled melodies. That's how we get our folk songs today. This one was published in 1882 by a guy by the name of Edward Harrigan, and the music was by David Braun, I believe, and it was written for an Irish drama called The Blackbird, but it's a song of... I remember many years ago traveling in Europe as a teenager and meeting an Irish family and saying, you know, I listen to all this Irish music at home and it's all about drinking excessive amounts of liquor. The man said, well, that, you know, that reflects a certain amount of truth in Ireland. He said, half the people in Ireland are terribly alcoholic and the rest of us are so appalled by this we don't touch a drop. Interesting explanation. So this one's called The Real Old Mountain Dew. Let waters flow and breezes blow in a free and easy way. but give me enough for the real old stuff that's made by Galloway Bay. And peelers all from Donegal, Sligo to Neath too. We'll give 'em a sip and take a sip of the real old Mountain Dew. I rumpa-teedle-dee, I-diddle-addle-ump-I-rumpa-diddle-I-day. I-diddle-addle-ump-I-rumpa-diddle-dee, rumpa-diddle-I-day. There's a sweet little still at the foot of the hill where the smoke curls up to the sky. By the whiff of the smell you can plainly tell there's poaching brewing nearby, and fills the air with a perfume rare betwixt both me and you. As home we roll, we'll finish up a bowl of the real old Mountain Dew. I-rumpa-diddle-dee, I-diddle-addle-ump, I-rumpa-diddle-I-day. I-diddle-addle-dee, I-rumpa-diddle-dee, rumpa-diddle-I-day. And learned men who used the pen ever wrote the praises high of the sweet poteen from Ireland green, distilled by reed and rye. And away with pills, it'll cure all ills, a Christian, a pagan, a Jew. Take off your coat and grease your throat with the real old Mountain Dew. I-rumpa-diddle-dee, I-diddle-addle-ump, I-rumpa-diddle-I-day. I-diddle-addle-dee, I-rumpa-diddle-dee, rumpa-diddle-I-day. Mascom Lamar Lunsford was a lawyer who always wore a black bow tie with the strings hanging down. In North Turkey Creek, South Carolina, he started the Fiddle Festival down there. He started the folk festivals. He was born way back in, I think it was like 1882. He was known as the minstrel of the Appalachians, and he wrote a whole bunch of songs and recorded some of them on 78 RPM records. And this is one of them. And I would insist that this is related to the song we just sang. This one's called The Good Old Mountain Dew, an American version that tells the same story. There's an old hollow tree down the road here from me, where you lay down a gal $1 or $2. When you come around the bend and go back again, there's a bucket of that good old Mountain Dew. They call it that good old Mountain Dew, and them that refuse it are few. I'll shut up my mug if you fill up my jug with that good old Mountain Dew. Now my brother Bill runs a sweet little still where you lay down $1 or $2. And the buzzards in the sky get so drunk they can't fly just from smelling that good old Mountain Dew. They call it that good old Mountain Dew, and them that refuse it are few. I'll shut up my mug if you fill up my jug with that good old Mountain Dew. Now my brother Mort, he's sawed off and short, and he stands about 4'2". But he thinks he's a giant if you give him a pint of that good old Mountain Dew. They call it that good old Mountain Dew, and them that refuse it are few. I'll shut up my mug if you fill up my jug with that good old Mountain Dew. So what's really interesting about the way history works is the people who fled the potato famine in Ireland, starving to death, naked, sick, homeless, broke, they got to the United States just as the gold rush was happening. So, you know, imagine that it's sort of the American fantasy. In other countries, people accept that they are poor and live happily ever after. But in America, every poor person is one lottery ticket away from being a millionaire. And it has often been explained that that's sometimes why Americans vote against their own interest. Because you know those billionaires and millionaires? Well, as soon as I hit the lottery, I'll be one of them too. So here's a song that reflects that attitude. This is one of the real songs sung on the ships coming over, not just from the potato famine, but for the gold rush. This one survives, and it's called Mershon Durkin. Goodbye, Mershon Durkin, I'm sick and tired of working. No more I'll dig those praties, no longer I'll be fooled. As sure as my name is Carney, I'll be off to California. Instead of digging praties, I'll be digging lumps of gold. Goodbye to all the boys back home, I'm going out across the foam to try and make my fortune in far America, where there's gold and silver plenty for the poor and for the gentry. And if I e'er return again, no longer will I say, goodbye, Mershon Durkin, I'm sick and tired of working. No more I'll dig the praties, no longer I'll be poor. As sure as my name is Carney, I'll be off to California. Instead of digging praties, I'll be digging lumps of gold. I've courted girls in Carney, in Kempthorne and Killarney, and far away in Queensland, and in the Cove of Cork. Goodbye to all this pleasure, for I'm off to seek me treasure, and the next thing that you'll hear from me is a letter from New York. Goodbye, Mershon Durkin, I'm sick and tired of working. No more I'll dig the praties, no longer I'll be full. As sure as my name is Carney, I'll be off to California. Instead of digging praties, I'll be digging lumps of gold. Here's one I know absolutely nothing about, but I think it's important to hear. It's another one I learned from Sam Hinton, and again, I can't find it anywhere, not published, not on the internet, not recorded. So you'll have to make the most of it, because this is probably the only place you're going to hear it. It was on the 1st of August, or the last day of July, that I met a lovely lady. She was staring at the sky. She was thinking of her lover, who was in America. And divils a word I said to her, and she said the same to me. It may be very difficult for people in 2018 to imagine that the Irish people who came over 150 years ago had the same status as the slaves. They were ostensibly the English people's whipping boys, if you will. If you study the history of America, you're studying the history of cheap labor in the New World. And the first cheap labor were Irish indentured servants that come over and they do 7 years. And, the plantation owners thought that was a really raw deal, because once they got these guys trained and were finally good at what they could do, they moved on. And also a lot of these Irish dropped dead from things like yellow fever and malaria, and the enslaved African Americans were a little bit more resistant to that. But the status of the Irish, even through the Civil War, they were really considered to be no better than the slaves or the freed slaves, or after the Civil War, African American people. It's difficult to imagine, since one of them has been president of the United States. One of the ways they turned this around is they were white, and they could speak English. And if you read the books in the library, one of the most disturbing parts is that they came to an America where the most popular form of entertainment was the minstrel show. And it's real hard to talk about the minstrel show in 2018 because it's so incredibly politically incorrect today. But I assure you that the minstrel show was bigger than the Beatles, bigger than Elvis. And whatever you may judge the minstrel show, America at that time, and in some ways today, is a caste system with rules for different races to get along with one another. And the minstrel show burlesqued and parodied that. And this was very instructive to immigrants who just got here, who were going to have to try to assimilate into the society. So in the minstrel show, there was an Irishman, with the silly pipe and the great big sideburns and the hat over his eyes. But within a generation, he was winking at the Irish people in the audience, kind of like Brian O'Lynn. So here's a song that was published in the year 1862, right during the Civil War, an American song by a guy named John Poole. And you have to remember, in those days, on the bars, the sign said, "No dogs are Irish." I kid you not. You can see the pictures in the library books if you doubt me. So this is the song that reflects the time of the signs on the bars that said, no dogs, no Irish. And of course the wantads would say in the newspaper, no Irish need apply, which is the name of this song. I'm a decent boy, just landed from the town of Ballyfad. I want a situation, yes, I want it very bad. I've seen employment advertised, it's just the thing, says I. But the dirty spalpeen ended with no Irish need apply. Oh, says I, now that's an insult, but to get the job I'll try. So I went to see the fellow with his no Irish need apply. Some may think it a misfortune to be christened Pat or Dan, but to me it is a privilege to be born an Irish man. Well, I went to find his residence. I got there pretty soon. I found the fellow seated. He was reading the Tribune. I told him what I came for, and he in a rage did fly. Said he, you are a Paddy, and no Irish need apply. Well, I felt my dander rising, and I'd like to black his eye to tell an Irish gentleman no Irish need apply. You may think it a misfortune to be christened Pat or Dan, but to me it is a privilege to be born an Irish man. Well, I couldn't stand it longer, so a hold of him I took, and I gave him such a whelping like he'd get at Donnybrook. He hollered, "Meal you murder," and he in a rage did fly, but he swore he'd never ride again, no Irish need apply. Well, I thanked him for his business, and I bid him a goodbye, saying next time you want a beating, right, no Irish need apply. You may think it a misfortune to be christened Pat or Dan, but to me it is a privilege to be born an Irish man. Spalpeen is a Gaelic word for rascal. He calls him a spalpeen. I had to look that one up. Well, some of the Irish melodies and songs are so widespread in the American culture, you really have to wonder, how did it happen? Who brought it over? Well, a lot of these Irish who came over, there were some really lousy jobs like mining guano in South America. Any kind of mining was a lousy job. Whaling was a terrible job 200 years ago, the last thing you want your children to grow up and be. And later, being a cowboy was kind of a loser job. If you had dropped out of school or left town with a bad reputation or decided not to marry the girl you'd promised to marry, becoming a cowboy was one way you could hide out. And these were merit jobs. If you've ever worked for a moving company, they don't care if you speak English or what color you are, as long as you can get the furniture up 6 flights of stairs without denting it. It's all merit-based. And whaling and mining and cowboying were that way. There were lots of Spanish-speaking cowboys, Indian cowboys, black cowboys. It didn't matter as long as you could get the job done. So here's a tune from Ireland. It's called The Bard of Armagh. It's been on a piece of paper since 1873, and it's about an old musician who's complaining that he's so arthritic now he can't play the harp as well as he used to. It went something like this. Oh, list to the tale of an old Irish harper, and scorn not the strains of his old withered hands. But remember his fingers, they once could move sharper, to raise up the memory of his dear native land. Now that song is still very widespread melody in the United States. I'll give you some history on the song that it has attached itself to. One of the big problems in the old world, just like the new world, was sexually transmitted diseases. And syphilis was pretty much a death sentence because the cure for it was pills of white mercury, which were actually more dangerous, kind of like the chemotherapy of its time. If the pills of white mercury didn't kill you, the syphilis would. And there's a song that's 400 years old called The Unfortunate Rake. A rake is somebody who's kind of Sammy Davis Jr. or Frank Sinatra-ing their way through life, and they are unfortunate. because they can crack this disease. So I'll sing you the oldest version I know, collected in the 1840s from an Irishman who said he learned it in 1790, and it's called My Jewel, My Joy. Probably a true story. My jewel, my joy, don't trouble me with the drum. Sound the dead march as my corpse goes along. Over my body throw handfuls of laurel, and let them all know that I'm going to my grave. As I went down to the door, as I went down to the door of my room, I met a young man all wrapped in white linen, and ready for the tomb. Had she but told me before she disordered me, had she but told me about it in time, I might have got salts and pills of white mercury. But now I'm a young man cut down in his prime. So there are dozens of versions of old songs that tell that same story, and it becomes one of the most widespread cowboy songs in the United States, and I will close the program with that. I'm just curious, if you were at the Woody Guthrie show a couple nights ago, show me your hand. Just for my own sensibility. I don't get here very often. You can put your hands down. I want you to know that at the back of the room, over there in the dark, dark corner, I have a table with a mailing list, and if you give me your email address and it's legible, I'll let you know the next time I get it here in North Carolina. It looks like it's going to be April of 2019. I have brochures about the work I do in school. I would be obliged if you would place that brochure firmly in the hand of a school principal and get me some school gigs when I come through in 2019. And I have 8 different CDs, and they contain many of the songs we've enjoyed at this program. And when you buy one of my CDs and take it home, not only do you get an hour of listening pleasure with the people you adore the most, but far more importantly, you get to take home a little piece of me, and I get to take home a little piece of you. And I always like to point out at every concert that if you're watching somebody sing old American folk songs in 2018, you're not in a coffee house, and you're not in a club, and you're not in a theater. You're in the meeting room of your own local public library, and you better get used to it, because this is kind of where vaudeville went. Us itinerant performers, we perform in libraries in this century. Check out all the cultural arts programs your librarians are presenting for you right here in this room. All you have to do is show up and fill the chairs, and it's so nice when we get so many people. I'm so glad you all came out tonight. And remember, if you only learn one thing from my sermon, libraries will get you through times of no money. A whole lot better than money's going to get you through times of no libraries. So I'll sing you the East Texas version of Streets of Laredo. The version you all know and grew up with is the one that uses that melody from the Bard of Armagh. Now that melody is called the Streets of Laredo. And what's interesting is that in the European version, it's this fellow who's fooling around before he was married with girls he didn't know, and he got a fatal disease. But in America, the American version is very different. This guy goes whoring, he goes gambling, he gets drunk, he's a fool, he gets shot, and we all love our comrade, so brave, young, and handsome. We all love our comrade, although he'd done wrong. Something very different between American folk songs and European folk songs. And the tune for this is called Nora McShane. And Nora McShane wasn't collected by O'Neill, because Nora McShane was already lost when Captain O'Neill became the chief of police in Chicago. It was a lost tune. The only reason we know about Nora McShane is because in 1871, James Wilton Rowe of Bangor, Maine, took his kids on a camping trip to Lake Chemo, spelled C-H-E-M-O, just east of Bangor. And he made up a little song, and his daughter wrote it down and said, well, Dad used the tune from Nora McShane. So now we know what tune they sing Streets of Laredo to in East Texas. I'll just give you a little snatch of that Lake Chemo song so you can get a sense of what James Wilton Rowe did with it in 1871. I left old Lake Chemo a long way behind me, with many a tear back to Old Town I gave. But if I should live till 1 year from this August, I'll pack up my traps for Lake Chemo again. There pickerel are plenty, perch in abundance, whiskey and new milk, they both flow like rain. And if I should live till 1 year from this August, I'll pack up my traps for Lake Chemo again. So the version that Sam Hinton grew up with in East Texas used that tune. When we finally put it all together, we realized the tune is Nora McShane, as identified by the daughter of James Wilton Rowe from Bangor, Maine. That same story about the unfortunate rake in the American version, one of the most widespread cowboy songs. And that song, The Unfortunate Rake, in the black community, it becomes the song about the St. James Infirmary. She's laid out on a long table, so cold, so dark, and so fair. And in the white community, it becomes The Streets of Laredo, about that cowboy who did all these things wrong, but for some reason, we don't judge him or scold him at all. We all love our comrade, so brave, young, and handsome. We all love our comrade, although he'd done wrong. As I walked out in the streets of Laredo, as I walked out in Laredo one day, I met a young cowboy all wrapped in white linen, as cold as the clay. I see by your outfit that you are a cowboy, these words he did say as I boldly drew nigh. Come sit down beside me and hear my sad story. I am shot in the breast and I know I must die. Oh, once in the saddle I used to go dashing, once in the saddle I'd dash away gay. First to the dram house and then to the card house. I am shot in the breast and I'm dying today. Get 6 big gamblers to bear up my coffin, get 6 pretty maidens to bear up my pall. Put bunches of roses all over the coffin, roses to deaden the clods as they fall. Won't you fetch me a cup of cold water to soothe my parched lips, the poor cowboy said. But ere I returned, the spirit had left him and gone to its maker, the cowboy was dead. We beat the drum slowly and played the fife slowly. We played the dead march as we bore him along. For we all loved our comrade, so brave, young, and handsome. We all loved our comrade, although he'd done wrong. Thank you so much.